Few 80s pop stars were as eye-catching as Adam Ant. The dazzling cavalry jacket, the eyeline piercing blue eyes, the white warrior stripe applied across his nose. His is an image that defined MTV as much as Duran Duran's Yacht, a-ha's pencil outlines, or Dire Straits' blocky capitalists. But unlike their music television brethren, Adam Ant survived punk batterings, bandmate betrayal, and press indifference to realise the marketing power of adding vibrant vision to his band's pummeling pop sound. This is New British Canon, and this is the story of Adam and the Ants, 1981. In November 1975, Stuart Goddard was the bassist for rock and roll nostalgics Bazooka Joe, headlining a show at St Martin's College of Art in London. The support band was the Sex Pistols, playing their first ever show, a mixture of Small Faces covers and Johnny Rotten spitting on the floor. And like a lot of musicians who witnessed them in the mid-70s, Goddard quickly realised that everything had changed. After the Pistols' 20-minute performance, which was greeted with silence by the students, we played our usual set, but it didn't feel right to me. The anger and the don't give a shit attitude that the Pistols had shown before our performance made our rock and roll pastiche sound as old and second-hand as it was. I felt annoyed and frustrated. They spoiled it for me. His bandmates, however, were not impressed, a difference of opinion that led to Goddard quitting the band. He had other things on his mind. He was 2/3 of his way through an art degree, had impulsively married his college sweetheart, was living with her parents, barely eating and consumed by a deep depression. However, a near-fatal overdose of his mother-in-law's medication in early 1976 was the wake-up call he needed. It was time to reassess his life. He formed his own band, the B-Sides, but not as Stuart Goddard. Instead, he went by a new name, one he had given himself after the Sex Pistols had opened his eyes to the future, Adam Ant. It wasn't long before the B-Sides also split, replaced with Adam and the Ants. The insect name chosen because if there's a nuclear explosion, the Ants will survive. Playing their first show in May 1977 at the ICA, the Ants became a staple of London's punk clubs, being a favoured support act for Susie and the Banshees and X-Ray Spex. Taking notes from Iggy Pop, Ant adopted a fearless stage persona, wearing a leather mask, bondage trousers, and often flinging himself into the crowd, where they gleefully wailed on him. To disturb and outrage was the name of the game. Inspired by the work of controversial visual artist Alan Jones, he often sang about bondage and sadomasochism. And like a lot of early punks, their aesthetics and song, Deutsche Girls, led the press to assume they had certain negative allegiances. Perhaps they thought that the use of the swastika by numerous punks was a gesture of support for fascism, but it invariably wasn't. It was worn naively to shock. I had suffered a few idiots taking my interest in pre-World War II Berlin decadence, and the S&M imagery as featured in The Night Porter, starring my personal hero Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling, as a sign of support for Nazis. It wasn't, and never had been. After splitting with his wife, Ant gained some punk clout by dating Jordan, alternative fashion icon and sales assistant at Vivienne Westwood's boutique, Sex. Not only did she end up managing the band during their early days, but on Ant's request, Jordan also carved the word f*** into the small of his back with a razor blade, a scar that remains to this day. Walking down the King's Road with a strategically ripped t-shirt in 1977, he caught the attention of filmmaker Derek Jarman, who cast him as the Kid in his punk parable, Jubilee. However, what could have been an opportunity instead turned into a weight around his neck. When on release, the music press hated the film's portrayal of the London scene, and Ant for being involved. In 1978, they played 2 separate Peel sessions. And released their debut single, the disarming music hall oddity, Young Parisians.
Why don't you come to Paris with me, see the Young Parisians?
It barely sold, and Decca immediately dropped them. Though the band was struggling, they remained a surprisingly solid live draw, with the name Adam and the Ants scrawled on many of the Mohican masses' leather jackets. When their debut album, Dirk Wears White Socks, was released in November 1979 on Indie Do It, it became the first album to top the UK Independent Album Chart when it was introduced in early 1980. They were indie darlings, no doubt, but Ant wanted more. It may be very romantic having cult status, but cult is really just a kind word for loser. You end up on just one level, with your audience running your career. The Clash didn't want to do Top of the Pops. But there were other groups around in 1977 who did have heroes, and didn't wear Doc Martens, and Adam and the Ants were one of them. I don't see why I should be intimidated into that credibility gap. However, at the tail end of 1979, Ant met the man who told him how to make his Top of the Pops dreams a reality. You could argue that Malcolm McLaren made UK punk happen, having briefly managed stateside proto-punks New York Dolls before their inevitable combustion. He became intrigued by an idea. What if there was a British band making energetic, confrontational, sloppy rock and roll, dressed in provocative anti-fashion that he, with partner Vivienne Westwood, could sell to the masses? With this idea in mind, he introduced the key players of London-based Roxy enthusiast, The Strand, to an Irish redhead with oral hygiene issues, and we got the Sex Pistols. By the end of 1979, the Sex Pistols were over. Their remaining members were suing McLaren, and he was in search of a new project to mastermind. Adam and the Ants, with their name recognition, embrace of Westwood's anti-fashion, and firebrand frontman, seemed to fit the bill. At a wedding reception that both McLaren and Ant were attending, McLaren struck up a conversation, asking about the band's most recent lineup shifts, after which a career-changing 3-hour conversation ensued. Malcolm McLaren just said to me, "What do you want, Adam?" I said, "I'd like to be a household name, and have everyone know and like Adam and the Ants." He said, "You're making it very difficult for yourself." And he was right. After this, Ant paid McLaren a £1,000 retainer, and he became the manager of Adam and the Ants. They started by listening to Dirk Wears White Socks together, word by word, note by note, with McLaren quizzing Ant over meanings and intent, while explaining why, though it might be a solid-selling independent release, it wasn't the kind of thing that was going to get played on the radio. Ant found the process exhausting, but hugely beneficial to the way he thought about his music. I enjoyed my time with Malcolm. I learnt a lot. His theories became very useful to me in my dealings after that time. He stripped it down to a realistic approach to the music industry. Simple things like don't be so esoteric. If you want a hit record, put your face on the cover. The structure of a good hit single. He was a great historian of music, which you wouldn't have thought. He came across as an anti-music person, but he actually knew a hell of a lot. McLaren also gave him a mixtape, an assortment of former pop idols, drum-forward compositions, and a cut from 1968's musical, Oliver. Many with oddball vocal hooks, and all vague suggestions of where Adam the Ants should be heading.
She's mine, she's mine, mine.
Oh, well, the same fool number made the same wrong move.
Hit him in the head.
Rave on and tell me not to be lonely.
McLaren particularly impressed on him the potential of the tribal drumming sampled on the French instrumental hit Burundi Black. By January 1980, Adam the Ants had gone through at least 4 distinct lineups, Ant being the only remaining original member. The current lineup was Matthew Ashman on guitar, Dave Barbarossa on drums, and Lee Gorman on bass. Under McLaren's supervision, the band learnt how to play this new sound, a mix of Burundi drumming and 50s rock and roll guitar, rehearsing through January. Midway through, Ant left on his own to take care of a press tour. On his return, McLaren informed him that there had been a mutiny. Malcolm took Dave and me to the Eagle, half a pint of lager and some bum snouts. He said, "Adam is crap, you're going nowhere, but you've got another choice. Form your own band with me as manager." We couldn't believe it. It was Adam's band. What made it worse was Adam had been really loyal to me at the beginning, when Malcolm wanted to sack me, but we decided to go with Malcolm. In his month overseeing the band, McLaren had realised that Ant was too difficult, not as malleable as he wanted. So he stole Ant's band with the intention of getting a new singer to put his Burundi rock and roll plan into action. 6 months later, he had found 13-year-old Annabella Lewin to front his group, and we got Bow Wow Wow. Again, his plan was to shock the public by exploiting social taboos, but having Lewin pose nude on their debut album cover was a queasy step too far. With no band and no hope, Ant was devastated, back to square one. But what he did have was his band name, a tape of the band's rehearsal demos, and a burning passion to beat McLaren at his own game.
A new rock family, a wild nobility, we are the family!
The first thing Adam Ant did after being fired from his own band was get in touch with guitarist Marco Perroni. Perroni had played with the Banshees at their infamous 1976 debut show at the 100 Club, and had recently parted ways with post-punk 4AD signees Rema Rema.
Oh, it's time to say goodbye!
On the suggestion of Jordan, Ant bussed across town to Harrow in the pouring rain, only for Perroni to not be home. So he left a note reading simply, "Call me, Adam." Though many guitarists had filtered through the Ants, one of the things that Ant had always lacked was a co-writer that shared his vision, and McCartney to his Lennon. But after one chat with Perroni, Ant knew he was his man. Though both had been swept up in the drama and energy of punk, they were glam rock fans at heart. I'd just left a post-punk band. I thought, I don't particularly like this music. I like T-Rex. So let's do that. If I had half an idea, it was to invoke the spirit of those records that I loved, Roxy Music especially. It's still rock and roll, but it's pop, and it's glamorous, and you want to be these people. Is there anyone who'd really want to be in Joy Division? Their first recording together was a redo of Dirk Ware's White Sox track, Car Trouble, to be released as a single for Do It. With Ant handling bass and John Moss, later of Culture Club, on drums. Production was taken care of by Chris Hughes, whom Ant nicknamed Merrick. Adding a heft and polish missing from the album version, Merrick was not only kept for future recordings, but added to the Ants as drummer. While assembling this new rhythm-forward version of the Ants, sparked by their joint love of glam rock, they realised something very obvious. Both the Glitter Band and Wizard had 2 drummers, which allowed for more creative and forceful beats. Therefore, the Ants should have 2 drummers. So alongside Merrick, they hired Terry Lee Mail as second drummer, as well as Kevin Mooney on bass. Kings of the Wild Frontier, the first thing they wrote together was less a song and more a showcase for that powerful beat. Bolstered in the studio by the rest of the band, banging guitar cases, doors, and the walls to create an enormous barrage of percussion. By the final mix, there are 13 separate layers of just drums. The idea was to be imposing, and to show how much better they could fashion McLaren's ideas. If you listen to Bow Wow Wow, it was a lot of timpanis, and Dave Barb's playing a lot of toms, quite high stuff. I wanted the opposite. We had two drummers, Chris and Terry, and I wanted a big orchestral sound for Kings of the Wild Frontier, which was really just an instrumental with a chant over the top. Once we'd cracked the sound of that, which was so fucking big, with the power of the guitars, it was like, well, that doesn't sound like Bow Wow Wow. It doesn't sound like anything. Guitar-wise, Peroni had abandoned the squiggled abstraction of Rema Rema for audacious, reverbed licks. Though many have compared it to the twang of Duane Eddy. His points of reference were actually more cinematic. My guitar sound wasn't so much Duane Eddy, it's more James Bond. It also comes from Phil Manzanera's solo, in the middle of Needles in the Camel's Eye. There's a twangy guitar solo on For Your Pleasure. It was more John Barry and Ennio Morricone than Duane Eddy. That's the way I work. My mind is full of old records. It was also glam rock and Mick Ronson. He was my big guitar hero. Thematically, Kings of the Wild Frontier is a war cry, a battle anthem shouting down all that had slighted Ant, and thought him a joke, from McLaren to the music press. Through the song, he makes the perhaps ill-judged comparison between himself and Native American tribesmen. In his mind, at least, he suffered just as much as them. His onstage attire at the time reflected this, applying the infamous white stripe, together with the Blackbeard hair additions, and the rented cavalry jacket, formerly worn by David Hemmings in The Charge of the Light Brigade. It was all the things I'd grown up with that I felt were heroic and sexy, and had a warrior bravado to them. I'd been reading about and studying pirates and the Native Americans for a few years. The Native American thing was as close to a religion as I had. Putting the Apache war stripe across my nose was a declaration of arms against the music industry, which I felt had ignored me and treated me very unfairly. When he first got to the States in 1981, a Native American group confronted him about his look, believing him to be perpetuating the harmful stereotype of the mindless savage. So I went to see them. I spent the day and I said, look, come and see the show, and if you think I'm using it in a derogatory way, I'll take it off. They came to see it, loved it, and it was alright. I got the go-ahead. I wouldn't have felt comfortable if I thought I was offending people for no just reason. The fact that you just don't know your subject. Angling for a larger platform from which to launch this new and improved version of the Ants, in May 1980 they embarked on their first UK tour together. With little marketing push, it sold out. By the tour's concluding date at the Empire Ballroom in London, the band had signed to major label CBS. But even still, the label wasn't quite sure what to do with them. It had been a while since a British band had attempted to create such colourful pop music. I remember going to meetings with CBS when we first signed, having to explain the concept of Adam and the Ants, because all the record company guys were Clash fans. I had to explain that we wanted to be pop stars. You know what pop stars do, don't you? They go on stage in makeup and stuff, and they sing songs, and their songs sell lots. And then they make lots of money. and then they buy cars and houses and things. That is what we're doing. Kings of the Wild Frontier was released as a single at the end of July 1980. Pipped to the post by Bow Wow Wow's C30, C60, C90 Go the week before. Neither set the chart ablaze at first, the Ants track peaking just inside the top 50, while Bow Wow Wow managed a relatively lofty number 34. As exciting as the Ants' new music may have been, the British public had to see them to get the full picture. Dog Eat Dog, the second single from Kings of the Wild Frontier album, was inspired by a quote from then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The title's idiom fitting for the ruthless, cannibalistic competition Ant felt he was locked into with everyone around him. Released at the beginning of October 1980, by its second week it had charted at number 37. Usually this wouldn't be a high enough placing to make it onto Top of the Pops, but with an artist dropping out last minute, Adam and the Ants got their chance on the nation's screens. Ant's mishmash pirate Native American character, while not endearing to the serious music press, was wondrous to kids watching, showing this new generation that pop stars can still play pretend. The thrill of their performance got the single to number 4 a couple weeks later. It was the start of an unreal run of chart success. Both Ant music and a re-release of Kings of the Wild Frontier hit number 2. Both held off the top spot by the aftershocks of John Lennon's death. Britain was on the verge of Ant-mania. Not since the reign of Mark Bolan and T-Rex had a pop group so effectively marketed themselves on British TV. Of course they weren't on Top of the Pops, but also its more serious muso cousin, the Old Grey Whistle Test, as well as multiple appearances on kids' TV like Swap Shop, Tiswas, and the in hindsight cursed Jim Will Fix It. Simply, they were the anti-Clash. They were even invited to attend the Children's Royal Variety performance in April 1981 to play in front of Princess Margaret. But due to their meteoric rise, debris was starting to chip away. Supposedly an act of anti-royalist defiance, Mooney dropped his bass guitar midway through Dog Eat Dog and strutted around in an exaggerated manner, drawing as much, if not more attention, as Ant himself. For this he was fired and replaced by one-time Roxy Music bassist Gary Tibbs. However, due to their punishing contract with CBS, they couldn't sit still. The Kings of the Wild Frontier album had come out in November 1980, but the band needed to release their follow-up by the end of 1981, lest they faced contractual repercussions. Released in May of 81, Stand and Deliver was its first single, Ant transforming from warrior pirate to dandy highwayman. With galloping drums and lyrics dressing down assumed unfashionable sorts.
When nothing is worth taking, it's kind of tough to tell a scrap the big mistake is making.
Its opening was designed to instantly grab attention and dissuade DJs from talking over it. We had a conversation about how we enjoyed records that came on the radio as a call to arms. We wanted Ant songs to have that same feeling as, say, Fashion by David Bowie. They basically start by saying, "Here we are, we're gonna be loud, check this out." That's how the fanfare of Stand and Deliver came along. where you immediately want to go, yes. Unobstructed by the memory of John Lennon, Stand and Deliver was the Ant's first #1, helped in part by his music video. Co-directed by Ant himself, he drew ideas from the film Where's Jack, where English rock and roll star Tommy Steele played a Dick Turpin-styled highwayman. With its Georgian glamour, actual sets, and the scene where Ant jumps through a sugar glass window, it was designed as a Hollywood movie in 3 minutes, and perfect for the soon-to-be-launched MTV. This was then followed by Prince Charming in September '81. Another UK #1 is Video acquainting his audience with his new titular character, as well as telling the gender-swap tale of Cinderella, with the British Monroe, Diana Dawes, in the role of the fairy godmother. I'd been reading the early Brothers Grimm fairy tales, which had always fascinated me. Prince Charming is based on Beau Brummel, the British dandy leader of fashion in the 18th century. That and the French Revolution, when fashion for men were exceedingly outrageous, and everything was exaggerated, and I felt that the early 80s scene could certainly do with that. Its opening was unforgettable, the Ants switching from many drums to one booming tom, as they rapidly scream-shout nonsense. Throttling the attention out of you by any means. The guiding principle of Adam Ant by this point is summed up in its key lyric. In the 12 months since first entering the UK charts, he'd refused all requests for interviews by the serious music weeklies, preferring his mouthpiece to be the tabloids and pop magazines like Smash Hits, as they had a wider readership. Enemy, Melody Maker and Sounds were all laughing at him, but Ant didn't care. He was such a big deal that his former labels were re-releasing the band's 70s singles to cash in. Debut single Young Parisians made the top 10.
Young Parisians are so French, not like me and you.
And dance troupe Zoo did some stereotypically German moves to Deutsche Girls on Top of the Pops. Due to the overlapping nature of the group's 9 charting singles of 1981, Adam and the Ants were in the UK charts for 91 weeks in a single year. By comparison, the highest charting single by McLaren's Bow Wow Wow, Go Wild in the Country, reached number 7 in 1982. There was a clear winner. Adam Ant was so famous that from January 1982, he had his own comic strip in Tops magazine, where he travelled through time grappling with various historical and mythical figures. He decks Attila the Hun and kicks Hitler down some stairs on the same page. But such blinding success could never be sustainable. Released in November 1981, Prince Charming was, singles aside, the weakest Adam and the Ants album. Part of this was down to a lack of material, combined with the band just being exhausted. Its stark third single, Ant Rap, is nothing but drums and vocals, laying bare the non sequiturs that often made up Ant's lyrics. But due to the push of Ant Mania, it still flew to number 3. I needed another year to get Prince Charming the way I would have liked. It was a bit of a rush job, but we were contracted to do another album, so we had to do it, or we would have got penalised. We were constantly producing singles, albums, a look, videos. My thing, and looking back, it was an impossible task, was to make every album look and sound completely different from the album before. The non-stop momentum took its toll. Peroni was sick of touring, the rest of the band was sick of each other, and barely holding it together. Adam had squeezed the Ants for all they were worth, but he was the only one ready for another go-around. So in March 1982 he fired his band, retaining only Peroni so he could start work on his first solo album. Out of the now ex-Ants, Chris Merrick Hughes was the one that benefited most from their end. He instead began producing full-time, including for Tears for Fears. One of the biggest songs of the 80s, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Hughes has a writing credit on that. Adam Ant returned in his new solo guise with Goody Two Shoes in May 1982. His lack of band took the printers by surprise, resulting in the initial run of singles being credited to Adam and the Ants. Another number one in the UK, it was also his biggest ever single in the US. With the video entrenched on MTV, it hit number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song itself had been sparked by something he'd said in a combative interview with the NME's Paul Morley about his clean living lifestyle.
Don't drink, don't smoke, what do you do? Don't drink, don't smoke, what do you do?
I'm sick and tired of being told that because I don't drink or smoke or take drugs, that I'm a goody two shoes. Okay, so I'm a goody two shoes. You know, so what? I don't like drugs, and that is a threat to the rock and roll establishment. Rock and roll has become the establishment. Goody Two Shoes was his last undeniable peak, before the inevitable decline. Each successive single sank further down the chart. The Phil Collins assisted Puss in Boots from 1983 got to number 5. But that was the last time Ant saw the UK top 10. His last big moment in the 80s spotlight was Live Aid in 1985. One of the first artists to sign up for the cause. By the actual day, his original 3 songs had been reduced to 1. Instead of playing anything from his 1981 heyday, he aired his new single, Viva La Rock. He was the only artist who played the event, whose single dropped in the charts the following week. It was the end of 5 years non-stop. We had run dry. Perhaps we had been away in America too much. Our party was over, but that's okay. We were a pop act. We had a 3-year lifespan, so you reassess your life. Now what? Ant continued releasing sparingly during the 90s, whilst returning to screen acting with one-off roles in Northern Exposure, Sledgehammer, and Batman the Animated Series, as well as a handful of films. He returned to the spotlight in January 2002, though not in ideal circumstances. He was arrested and then sectioned for brandishing a World War II era starter pistol and throwing a car starter motor through a pub window. It was a worldwide headline, the image of Adam Ant with a firearm recalling the Stand and Deliver music video. But at the time he was suffering through a bout of hypomania and had little awareness of his actions. This hadn't been the first time Ant had had issues with his mental health. After a particularly tough episode in 1984, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but had spent most of his life, including the 18 months when he was the biggest pop star in Britain, swinging between phases of mania and depression. I was aware of it every day. What I felt guilty about looking back is all of those midnight phone calls. There was always something, a disaster that hadn't yet happened. You'd be going, yeah, Adam, don't worry about it. You'd think, silly twat. But to him, his fears were very real. In the aftermath of the 2002 incident, Ant was one of the first pop stars to speak openly about his mental health, with his candid 2006 autobiography trying to erase the associated stigma. After some conscious time off, he returned in 2013 with a new album. Adam Ant is the Blue Black Hussar in Marrying the Gunner's Daughter, his first since 1995. And while he could cash in big by reforming the Ants for 80s revival package tours, at the moment he refuses to succumb to nostalgia. New music is always rumoured to be just around the corner. Looking back, Adam Ant was the first new pop star of the MTV era, predating a lot of the look-focused British new pop that dominated the channel during the first half of the 80s.
Nice day for a white wedding. Love it will be in the evening colors are like my dream. Oh, sweet dreams are made of these.
I also can't help but think that Swords of a Thousand Men by Tenpole Tudor, with its gang chants, forceful percussion, and Night rather than Pirate Chic became a chart hit in 1981 due to its similarity to the Ants' whole deal. What is somewhat surprising is the influence on 90s alternative, with many bands from that era covering sometimes quite obscure Ants songs. It has also been suggested that Slipknot, with their fondness for dress-up, gang mentality, and 2 drummers, were Ants fans. And yeah, maybe. Ant himself knows exactly what his appeal was, taking the fun and colour of glam rock, and reframing it for the new media landscape of the 1980s. An avalanche of drums dueling with Peroni's extravagant guitar work, and Ant's yodeling ad-libs. The fact that it sounded so thrillingly vital was almost an afterthought. I certainly feel that I didn't compromise in any way, shape or form, musically or visually, and the public grabbed hold of it. I think it was quite easy for kids to adapt the look. It didn't cost them a lot of money, and I think it went hand in hand with that smash hits era, when it wasn't so much about what was written in the article, but about ripping it out and sticking it on the wall. That hadn't really happened since T-Rex. So it was a return to that, a return to pop. Thanks for watching. What is your favourite 80s artist that made the leap from punk to pop? Comment down below. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and why don't you also do me a favour and share it with a couple of people. It really does help. As always, I'd like to shout out this month's new top tier supporters over on Patreon. Mia Gustafsson, Hibernacular, and Tristan Freeman. And thanks to everyone else that supports me, and I will see you in several weeks' time for something you can move to.